So, today, let's talk about the Mahabharata. Have you ever wondered why nobody you've met has read the Mahabharata? We've heard the stories, we've heard bits and pieces from our grandmother or grandfather or parents or whatever. But do you ever remember seeing a Mahabharata in your house? I remember seeing one copy of the book when I was like 8, maybe 10 years old. I managed to read it then, and then it disappeared. And after that, there has never been a copy of the Mahabharata in the house. When I asked my mother this, I was told it's a tale of war. So you don't keep a tale of war in the house. I actually think that's a whole load of bullshit. I think that's a very big myth. If story of a war kept in the house created fights, there are so many books that should be removed from the house. The question here is why the myth? Why was the Mahabharata not? It is one of the biggest epics in India. Why was it not more popular till it got made into a TV series? It was not even that popular as a book. It was the TV series that made it a household name. Everybody, when they refer to the Mahabharata, only refer to the Gita, not the story of the Mahabharata. The Gita is an epic within the Mahabharata, which is an epic in its own right. The Mahabharata is written by Ved Vyas around 3rd century BCE. You cannot date it completely. Not only did Ved Vyas write it, he also played a major role in the Mahabharata. Fun fact, it is 1.8 million words and it's roughly 10 times the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey put together, or 4 times the size of the Ramayana. It is also sometimes called the fifth Veda. Now, I don't know whether it's called the fifth Veda because of the Gita portion in it or the entire epic is the way they call the fifth Veda. Whichever way it is, I think the book should have been read by very many more people. I think Ved Vyas wrote the Mahabharata for two main reasons. One was to tell his own story. His story, the story of his sons, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidur, and his grandsons, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The second reason Ved Vyas wrote the Mahabharata was to bring the Gita to the public. That was a time when ritualism was rampant. And because of severe ritualism, people were losing faith, they were losing their way. The Gita was a way to bring the Vedantic way of life back to the masses. And I think these are the two main reasons why Ved Vyas wrote the Mahabharata. And it's also because of this, I do believe that there is a lot of truth in the Mahabharata. Also, if you go and look at it, when we finish the synopsis, you'll understand it's about normal people. It's about fight, it's about ego, it's about jealousy, it's about position, power, money, it's about lust, it's about, you know, everything that a normal human being goes through. The Ramayana, on the other hand, is about this person who's too good to be true. Maybe that is why the Ramayana was being pushed way more than the Mahabharata was being pushed. Because in the Mahabharata, you could see reflections of everyday life. It is what normal people behave even today. The Ramayana is something that you aspire to be like Ram. At least some people aspire to be like Ram. I don't believe in it. I feel he's too good to be true. Nobody can, in the given circumstances, in the life we face, can really be that good. Anyway, Ramayana is a discussion for another day and another time. Right now, let's get back to the Mahabharata. Let's get into a little of the backstory. So, there was a king called Shantanu who ruled over Bharatvarsh, complete India. He was very good, very, very popular, and he was so good that they say that even the gods were jealous of him. One day, Shantanu was walking on the banks of the river Ganges and came across this beautiful woman and fell in love with her instantly. He asked her to marry him, and she agreed on two conditions. One was, don't ever ask me who I am, and the second was, don't ever question any action of mine. Shantanu was so much in love with this woman, love, lust, whichever one it was. He was so enamored by this woman that he agreed to her conditions and they got married. They had their first son, and this lady took the son to the Ganges and drowned the child. Shantanu watched but did not say anything because of the vow or the promise he had given her to not question her. And this happened for 7 times. 7 sons, all 7 drowned in the Ganges. When they had the eighth son, and the lady was taking the son again to the Ganges to drown him, that finally Shantanu wakes up and he stopped her and asked her, why are you doing this? So the lady looked at him and said, well, you've broken your vow to me. Now let me explain. I am the river Ganges, born in mortal form because I was cursed by Brahma. The 8 sons that I have were the 8 Vasus who had been cursed by sage wishes that they would be born as mortals. So what I am doing is when they're born, I drown them so that their mortal life is over and they can go back to their celestial abode. But now that you've broken your promise to me, I'm going to take the son and I'm going to go away and return him to you at a later date when he's fully trained and capable of ruling the kingdom. And saying that, Ganga vanished. Shantanu was left alone. I hope he pondered over the fact that he actually allowed 7 children to be killed. It's very nice to say that. Or they were cursed and they did not have to have a mortal life, and that is why Ganga was doing them a favor by killing them. So she did what was right by her thought process. What about him as a father who didn't know the backstory, who didn't know anything? Why did it take 7 deaths to react to the eighth one? It's a question I have no answer for, but it is something that I keep wondering. What maybe that is why the Gita was so important, active resistance to evil. Shantanu allowed 7 deaths before he reacted. What happened to that active resistance to evil? One day, Shantanu was walking on the banks of the river Ganges, and there he saw this beautiful, good looking, smart boy who had stopped the flow of Ganges with his arrows. He stopped and asked the boy who he was. To discover, Ganges came out of the river and told him, this is your son, Devrata. He has been trained in all the scriptures by sage Vashisht and in the art of warfare by Parshuram. He is fully ready to become your heir. You can take him back with you. So Shantanu, very happy, took his son, crowned him heir apparent, and they were living happily. But he was lonely. One day he was strolling down the banks of another river, not the Ganges, where he came across this beautiful woman, Satyavati. She was the daughter of the chief of the fisherman tribe. He asked her to marry him. She said no. She insisted, I will only marry you on one condition, which is that My children will be the heirs to the throne, and unless you can promise me that, I am not going to marry you. Shantanu was in a moral dilemma. He wanted to marry her, yet he did not want to take the right of his son away from him. When Devrata came to know about his father's dilemma, he went to Satyavati and he promised her, I will not rule the kingdom. I give up my rights to the throne. Please marry my father. She refused. She says, no, but if you have children, they will have the right to the throne. So he told her, I will not marry. I will not marry. I will not rule. I don't want the throne. She was still not satisfied. So what Devrata did was he took a vow of complete celibacy and henceforth came to be known as Bhishma and later as Bhishma Pitama, the man of the great vow. After he took that vow, did Satyavati agree to marry Shantanu and they lived happily ever after. So, anyway, Satyavati had two children. The elder one died very sickly. The younger one, Vichitravirya, was also very, very sickly but alive. Because he was very sickly, no king wanted to marry their daughter to him. Once again, Bhishma to the rescue. So Bhishma went and abducted three sisters, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, from their Swayamvar and brought them back to Vichitravirya to marry. Amba, the eldest, was actually in love with a prince called Shalva. She begged Vichitravirya that I'm in love with this man, and I was in the process of garlanding him at the Swayamvar to choose him. Please allow me to go back to my love. And Vichitravirya agreed and allowed her to go back. When Amba went back, he refused to accept her, saying, you're somebody else's property now. I cannot take you back. Amba, completely dejected, went back to Vichitravirya. And he refused to accept her, saying, I've gifted you to somebody, I can't take you back. Of course, women were properties at that time, so they could be abducted, picked up, gifted, given away, whatever. Hard to accept, but that was the truth of those ages. Amba then went to Bhishma Pitama and told him, you abducted me. It is because of you I am in this position. You need to marry me. Bhishma refused, saying, I've taken a vow of celibacy. I cannot marry you. Amba finally, in absolute, totally despondent, went and prayed to Lord Shiva. Shiva came and gave her the boon, saying that you will be the reason for Bhishma's death. He has the boon where he can choose when he dies, but the reason for death will be you, but not in this lifetime, not in this form. Having heard this, Amba jumped into the fire and was reborn as Shikandi, the son of King Draupad. She was, he became the reason for Bhishma Pitama's downfall. When the war was being waged, the Kurukshetra war was being waged, the only way to defeat Bhishma Pitama was that Arjun put Shikandi in front of him as a foil. The moment Bhishma Pitama saw Shikandi, he knew Shikandi is Amba from her past life. He put his weapons down because he would not raise his weapons on a woman. And that is how Arjun was able to hit the arrow that mortally wounded him. Of course, Bhishma Pitama chose to die much later, the end of the Kurukshetra war. But the mortal wound, the reason for that was Amba. Hell hath no fury as a woman scorned. It is so, so true. Also, what is amazing is look at the power of a woman. You had Satyavati who changed the course of the dynasty by ensuring that she would not marry Shantanu till he promised her children would be the heir to the throne. Similarly, there was another woman, very powerful woman in history, who changed the course of a country. Anne Boleyn refused to bed King Henry VIII till he legally married her. To marry Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII had to both divorce Catherine. Since he was a part of the Roman Catholic Church, a divorce was not possible. Henry VIII broke from the Roman Catholic Church, created the Church of England, divorced Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn. It's another matter that later he beheaded Anne Boleyn, but she was his legal wife, and because she was his legal wife, her daughter Elizabeth got to rule after Henry VIII. See how women, the power of women, when they choose to use it, they can change the destinies of countries. Never forget that. No matter how much women get treated as properties, given, taken, gifted, whatever, a woman has tremendous power so long as she recognizes that power. Satyavati recognized it, Anne Boleyn recognized this. Come on, ladies, let's get up and recognize our own power. Coming back to this, Vichittravira, not just being sickly, was also important, of course, put very beautifully in the Mahabharata. Of course, Ved Vyas has very poetically put it in a different way. But if you cut across all the poetry, bottom line, he was important. And he died childless. Satyavati, to ensure the continuity of her clan, called Ved Vyas. Ved Vyas was Satyavati and sage Parashar's son. She had him before she married Shantanu. So she called her son and asked him to procreate. As it said in the Mahabharata, she asked him to bless Ambika and Ambalika with children. Realistically, Ved Vyas came, procreated with the two women for the children to be born. Poetic license once again. Ved Vyas was not a very good looking man. In fact, he was pretty scary. When he entered Ambika's chambers, she was so scared seeing him that she closed her eyes. Anyway, the act happened. Then he entered Ambalika's chambers. She looked at him and became completely white out of fear. When Vedvyas came out, he went to his mother Satyavati and he told her, because Ambika closed her eyes, the child will be born blind. Because Ambalika went white with fear, the child will be born white. I presume leukoderma. Satyavati, hearing this, begged him to give Ambika one more chance. Vedvyas agreed. He went back to Ambika's chambers, but Ambika was so scared that she put a maid there instead of her. This maid was not scared and procreated with Vedvyas, and they had Vidur. Perfectly normal, very intelligent, very well blessed. And this brings me back to the point where I started from, that actually the Mahabharata is the story of Ved Vyas, his sons, Dhritarashtra, born of Ambika blind, Pandu, born of Ambalika, with white or with leukoderma, and Vidur, born of a maidservant but very intelligent and gifted, and their subsequent children. Dhritarashtra was the elder child, but because he was blind, the crown was given to Pandu. Dhritarashtra married Gandhari, and there's a beautiful story that says that when Gandhari heard that the man she's going to marry is blind, tied a strip of cloth on her eyes to say that if my husband can't see, neither will I, and chose to be blind. Pandu married Kunti and had a second wife called Madri. Once, when Pandu was on a hunting expedition, he disturbed the lovemaking of a sage who cursed him that if you touch a woman, you will die instantly, which meant Pandu was could not have heirs, and he decided, since I can't have heirs, he abdicated, gave the kingdom to Dhritarashtra, and went into the forest to stay with both his wives, Kunti and Madri. Now, because a lineage cannot be left barren, beautifully put in the Mahabharata, Kunti had been given a boon. She invoked varied gods and had three sons by them, and gave passed on the same boon to Madri, who had twins. And because they were born of celestial beings, it was all okay, hunky dory. Now Pandu also had progeny. But let's go back a little. Gandhari was blessed by Ved Vyas to have this really beautiful, handsome, educated, intellectual son. When she conceived before Kunti. When she conceived, 9 months later, when she delivered, though it was a lump of flesh. Gandhari was very upset. She went to Vedvyas and said, "What kind of a boon is this? I This is a lump of flesh." Vedvyas said, "Bring 100 pots." But Gandhari stopped him and said, "But I want a daughter too. You promised me 100 sons, but I want 100 sons and one daughter." So Vedvyas cut up that piece of flesh into 101 pieces, put them in pots of ghee, and said, "Let them just stay for a year. When you open them, you will have your healthy children." In the interim, while this gestation was happening, Kunti gave birth to Yudhishthir, which is why Yudhishthir became the eldest of the cousins and the natural heir to the throne as per the customs and traditions of the country. A year later, when the pots were opened, Gandhari was blessed with 100 sons and one daughter, Duryodhan being the eldest of them. It is from here the real story of Mahabharata starts. The rivalry between the cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And that is the central theme of the Mahabharata. One day in the forest, Pandu couldn't resist Madhuri and he started making love to her. And obviously, the curse was invoked and he died. Madhuri jumped into the funeral pyre with her husband and died with him. Kunti took the 5 sons, brought them back to the palace to stay at the palace. So now in the palace you have Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, their 101 kids, and Kunti with the 5 Pandavas. Now Dhritarashtra was really power hungry. He wanted the power, the throne, the kingdom, everything. So, bottom line, the 5 Pandavas were brought up, but in the palace, so to say that all the cousins were treated equally. But obviously, the Pandavas were not treated the same way. They were belittled, they were snubbed, they were rebuked, they were slighted. Because of that, they became the underdogs, which is why their teachers, Dronacharya, Kripacharya, even Bhishma Pitama, gave them that extra love. You know how you do that with an underdog? They pampered them, looked after them, gave them that extra, which is why they were brought up to excel. Scriptures, to excel in all forms of weapons, to excel in warfare. Also, they say children follow in the footsteps of the parents. This is so true. Because Dhritarashtra's love for the throne, love for power, love for position was so high, he set the path his children would follow. And he and Shakuni was Gandhari's brother who had chosen to come and stay with his sister. The two of them were the reason Duryodhan had so much of enmity against his cousins. Actually, if you read between the lines, Duryodhan was a very soft hearted, very gentle, very generous, very intelligent, and a very nice person altogether. I think his biggest failing was he listened too much of advice from his elders without applying his own power of reasoning. Or maybe that reasoning had got completely bent, seeing all that rivalry, all that animosity that had been created by his father and his uncle. Anyway, as per as per the law, Yudhishthir, being the eldest, was named the crown prince. Duryodhan, because of all this, was in a constant state of competition with the Pandavas. He was urged very subtly by his parents and very openly by his uncle Shakuni. The poor child was misguided as a child and stayed misguided as an adult. Feed enough venom to a person and they become more poisonous than a snake. And this is what happened to Duryodhan. He became a puppet in the hands of others and went down in the annals of history as an evil person. I don't think he was that evil. In due course, Yudhishthira, being the eldest, was anointed as heir and crown prince. This was the final seal on the fate of the Pandavas. The enemy list was large and consisted of the high and mighty, starting from Dhritarashtra, going all the way down to Shakuni. Each and every member had a personal grouse against the boys or a vested interest why they did not want the Pandavas to rule. After the coronation, a plot was hatched by Shakuni and Duryodhan that the Pandavas were invited to go stay in a palace which was made of wax, a house made of wax which was highly inflammable. The plot was to burn them so that it would look like an accident and the Pandavas would die and everybody would go home happy. Vidur informed the Pandavas about the plot, and secretly a tunnel was dug from under the palace out into the forest. So before it could be set to fire, the Pandavas escaped, and the house was set to fire. And unfortunately, there was a tribal woman who had come for dinner that night with her five sons. She died in the fire, and everybody presumed that it was Kunti with the five sons who had died in that fire. The Kauravas were happy, Dhritarashtra was happy, Duryodhan was happy, everybody was happy that, it's done and dusted, now we can rest in peace. But the Pandavas, with their mother, had escaped into the forest and they lived in hiding for a while to come. It was during this period, living in the forest, that he met and wedded the demoness Hidimbi and had a son called Ghatotkacha. There are also a lot of other side stories, but we'll get into those some other time. While they were living in hiding, King Draupad announced the Swayamvar for his daughter Draupadi. There was a very tough test based on the skill as an archer. You had to pass this test to be able to win Draupadi's hand. Any and everybody came to take part in that Swayamvar. Draupadi was supposed to be exceedingly good looking, very, very beautiful. All the kings came there. Karan also came. The Kauravas came. There is a backstory to Karan. Kunti, so they say, when she was given this boon that she could invoke any god to have a child with that god, obviously wanted to test the boon before her marriage, and she had Karan from the sun god. Because she had a child out of wedlock, she picked him up, put him in a boat, and he was found by Radhe the charioteer, who adopted him as his own. It was during some tournament when Karan excelled and he was not allowed to compete. That Duryodhan, being the kind hearted, generous person that he is, totally impressed by the valor of Karan, instantly gave Karan the kingdom of Angad and said, he is a king, he has the right, he is not no longer the son of a charioteer. And having done that, he had bought the everlasting loyalty of Karan to him. Karan, of course, had no idea of his background or who he was or where he came from. Anyway, Karan as a king in his own right, had come for the Swayambar, Draupadi's Swayambar. As he picked up the bow to shoot the eye of the fish, Draupadi stepped up and said, "No, you may be a king today, but you come from a lower class and you're not entitled to win my hand." Thus starting an enmity with Karan. You know, a woman scorned, but a man scorned is no less venomous. She made an everlasting enemy out of Karan by doing this. The Pandavas walked in dressed as ascetics. Arjun, as everybody knows the story, Arjun was able to pierce the eye of the fish and won Draupadi as his wife. After winning her, the Pandavas revealed who they were, and that is how the world came to know that the Pandavas were alive. Again, as the famous story goes, they took Draupadi back with them to Kunti, and she, without even knowing what it was, said, "Share it equally." And Draupadi became Panchali, the wife of the five Pandavas, shared equally by the five of them. There was a blind obedience to the elders that has been shown in the Mahabharata. Not one of the sons questioned that this is a lady, this is a human being. How are you giving us the dictate to share her equally? That is not the way it works. Draupadi did not object to what was said and done, and subsequently became the wife of the five Pandavas. I understand obedience to your elders. I don't understand this kind of blind obedience. And we will see it again as we go down. As we go further into the Mahabharata, we will again see how this blind obedience was not really the best thing that could have happened. Now everybody knew the Pandavas were alive. The elders counseled Dhritarashtra, and half the kingdom was given to Yudhishthir and the Pandavas to rule. And this was the area that was known as Indraprastha, which I think, if we check with history, is the Delhi, the Delhi and the neighboring areas. Very rocky, very barren, not much of vegetation, not too much of water, but that was what was given to them, that, okay, rule over this. And of course, as they ruled over it, they created this phenomenal palace. I believe Indraprastha was supposed to be even more beautiful than Swarglok, the domain of the god Indra. After Yudhishthira was crowned, he did a Rajsuya Yagya to proclaim him as the unbeaten emperor of the entire realm. The Yagya was successful. Yudhishthira was known as the undefeated king, which irked the Kauravas, Dhritarashtra, Duryodhan, Shakuni all the more. It was like an open, festering wound. Shakuni, of course, could not take this, so he counseled Duryodhan and they invited Yudhishthira for a game of dice. Yudhishthira's biggest weakness was gambling. He couldn't resist gambling. They sat down to play dice. Shakuni was supposed to be the master of dice. And slowly over time, Yudhishthira lost all his wealth, his personal fortune, his personal jewelry, everything. Then he staked his kingdom, lost that. Staked his brothers, lost them. Staked himself, lost that. And finally, with having nothing more to stake, staked his wife and lost her too. How is Yudhishthir Dharmraj Yudhishthir if he could not control his senses, where he was so addicted to gambling that he didn't understand the difference between good and bad? He staked human beings like they were vegetables in a market that could be picked up and given away or bought or sold. And not one person objected to it, and yet he is called Dharamraj Yudhishthir. Somehow, I don't think so. In this entire story of the Mahabharata, the weakest link I find is Yudhishthira. I think he's been glorified way too much. He was just a very, very ordinary human being with major addiction to gambling, which led to the downfall of not just him, his entire family, which he had no right to do. Since he had lost Draupadi, Dushashan, the younger brother to Duryodhan, went to her chambers and dragged her by the hair into the court and started trying to unrobe her. Draupadi prayed to Lord Krishna, and as Dushashan was unraveling her sari, the material just kept growing. There was no end to it, so that her modesty was not breached. In all of this, Bhishma Pitama, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Dronacharya, Kripacharya, all the stalwarts, Ashwatthama, Karan, everybody, more importantly, Yudhishthir, his four brothers, sat silently and watched this goddamn abuse. Unbelievable. Luckily for her, she could not be disrobed, and then she fought back. Woman, look at her power. She fought back, asking one question: was I staked before Yudhishthir lost himself in the game of dice, or after? When the answer she got was that she was staked after, she says, a man who's lost himself has no right to stake anybody else. I no longer become his property. Anyway, she fought. Finally, the elders came to their senses. Dhritarashtra apologized to her, called her to him, and said, child, ask me a boon. I will give you whatever you ask for. She asked for the freedom of the Pandavas. He gave her a second boon. She asked for freedom for Yudhishthir. When he said, what about you? Her reply was, I am free. I was never anybody's slave. And with that, she secured the freedom of her five husbands. I think Dhritarashtra thought that by doing this act of benevolence, he would override what had happened, but nothing ever will override what happened in that court that day, when every single person, it is not just the person who's committing the crime who's guilty. It is everybody who's watching that crime happen. They're as guilty. That day, there was not one person who was not guilty of what happened to Draupadi. Not one person rose in her defense. Not one person stepped forward to stop or protect her. And here again, I bring up the point of obedience. The absolute blind obedience that the younger brothers had to Yudhishthir, that they allowed him to stake them and lose them in a game of dice. They allowed their brother to stake their wife that they had sworn to protect and cherish without protesting. This kind of blind obedience, I don't understand. And maybe that is why, like I said before, maybe that is why the Vedantic way of life was very important to bring back. Because if it's ritualism that is demanding blind obedience to your elders, the Vedantic way of life teaches us to question, it teaches us common sense, it teaches us logic. Maybe if these people were following the Vedantic way of life, this shameful episode may not have ever happened. My question: does obedience, blind obedience, override the diktat of active resistance to evil? I don't think it does. I don't think I would ever, personally speaking, have that kind of blind obedience to anybody. There would always, that soul inside me, that God that resides inside me, that God that I'm a part of, would resist, would not allow me to be party to such evil. I hope that is true of everybody. Yudhishthir was challenged to another game of dice, which he agreed to, which is even more amazing, and nobody protested. This time, the stakes were: if he won, he would get the entire kingdom; if he lost, 13 years of exile, out of which 12 years were in the forest and 1 year was incognito. If in that 1 year of incognito they were discovered, they would have to go back into 13 years of exile again. Now, this was beautifully thought out by Shakuni because he said 1 year of being incognito is very hard to hide somebody of Bhim's stature or Arjun's stature. So it'll be very easy to find them. And then 5 men, 1 woman, they will find it very hard to go incognito, which is why the stakes. And Arjun and Yudhishthir lost the game again. So the 5 Pandavas, along with the wife Draupadi, went into 13 years of exile. Once they completed that exile successfully, I must say, they even managed the incognito 1 year of incognito successfully, hiding in the Matsya kingdom. They came back and demanded their rightful kingdom, which obviously was refused to them. Duryodhan refused to even part with 5 villages, let alone their half of the kingdom. And this set the scene for the Mahabharata. Now, the Battle of Kurukshetra or the Mahabharata became inevitable. Before the battle, obviously, both sides, Duryodhana and Yudhishthira, amassing their allies, their kings that were loyal to them to make up their armies. The first person they went to was Krishna. Krishna was fast asleep. So Yudhishthir humbly sat at his feet. Duryodhan went and sat at his head because it was demeaning for him to sit at somebody's feet. When Krishna opened his eyes, obviously the first person he saw was Yudhishthir, so he told him, "You have first right of refusal. Ask me whatever you want. The choice is me or my armies. You can't have both. So you can't have me and my armies. So one will get me, one will get my armies." Yudhishthir very sensibly chose Krishna. Duryodhan happily took the armies because the Yadav armies or the army of Krishna was huge and powerful. And the great battle of Kurukshetra or the Mahabharata started. The battle lasted for 18 days, and during the course of the battle, all the Kauravas died, each and every one of them. The destruction caused by the war was unimaginable. In fact, the saying goes that there was so much of blood shed that the entire soil of the Kurukshetra region had become red and would continue to be red for 7 generations. Now it's obviously a lot more generations than that. But I did go to Kurukshetra and I did dig up. The soil wasn't that red, but then we are very many more generations than 7 that have gone past. The Pandavas were victorious, Yudhishthira was crowned king. The love we have for material sometimes can be so strong. With Dhritarashtra and Gandhari, it was so strong that after losing all their sons, they continued to stay in the palace. It took Vidur a very long time to convince his elder brother Dhritarashtra to let go. Finally, Dhritarashtra and Gandhari agreed to go into the forest where they stayed till they died. But it took a lot of counseling from Vidur. They were not willing to let go. Even after all the sons are dead, they still wanted to continue to stay in the palace. This is how Maya grips us, doesn't allow us to go. The Bhagavad Gita is an epic within an epic, and it is a part of book 6 of the Mahabharata. We are doing the Gita sessions, they're up there on my YouTube videos. It is basically a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, where Krishna is counseling Arjun on the right way to act, the right way to behave, and why the battle was inevitable. The Gita incorporates the core philosophies of the Upanishads and other Hindu texts, the Vedas particularly. It is the go to book for spiritual and moral guidance. I think it's a book that adapts itself to every generation. Doesn't matter where you are, who you are, or what you are. After a long and prosperous rule, finally Yudhishthir gave up the throne to Parikshit, who was the son of Arjun and Uttara. He and his brothers, along with Draupadi, took the great journey to heaven. Beautiful story. Talk about it another day. Parikshit started ruling, was an amazing ruler, very, very kind, benevolent, just, intelligent, was the perfect ruler that the country needed. Parikshit was cursed by Sringin, the son of Seth Samika, that he would die from a bite from Takshak, the king of snakes, within 7 days. Parikshit, after receiving this curse, was not upset or anything. All he did was ask all the elders and the wise people, how can I attain moksha within this 7 day period? And he was told the way to achieve moksha was to listen to the Sri Mad Bhagavad Gita, also known as the Suksagar. That was, it's actually a book which is supposed to be completed. The recitation of that book is supposed to be completed within 7 days. And the saying goes that anybody who does that 7 day reading automatically attains moksha. Said Sukdev came and he read the Srimad Bhagavad Gita to Parikshit, and on day 7, when he was bitten by Takshak, he got moksha. Someday we will get into the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. I love the book. It is something that I have read. I cannot even remember how many times. I just love the mythology. I love the lessons that are hidden behind the mythology. But having said that, we come to an end of the synopsis of the Mahabharata. So, lots of questions that come up. Like I said in the beginning, to me, it's a true story because it is about Ved Vyas. It is about his sons, it's about his grandsons. Of course, as stories go, it's obviously been embellished a lot, and there must have been a lot of poetic license that has been taken. But bottom line, I think the Mahabharata was the biography of Ved Vyas. And it was also the means of bringing the Bhagavad Gita to the masses. I hope you've enjoyed this.